15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
This is Houston, you are go for staging.
Alright guys, so that is the full line animation that we're going to sort of break down today. So yeah, I had the opportunity and absolute pleasure to create this for CRTVCHURCH.com, I believe it is. So if you're not really sure about Creative Church and what they do, they have an awesome, let me pull up their website. Many of you probably are familiar with it, but they have a killer following and a support group and community for design, really church design, church creative stuff. So you know, give their Creative Church group a follow on Facebook, as well as you can just visit CRTVCHurch.com. I believe that might work. Yeah, and you can kind of follow them. And they do a lot of cool stuff on Instagram and whatnot. So, anyways, I've been part of that group for a little while, and they reached out to me about maybe being able to do the opener for their series. So I was super honored to be asked to do that, and so we spent a little bit of time kind of ideating and trying to come up with what that would be. So the guy Nick, excuse me, Nick Goodner, you know, pitched a couple ideas, and so we then bounced back and forth sort of the script on what it would be, and try to piece it together to make it for, you know, a pretty fun opening video that matched their brand and was a sort of a good launching off point to their series. So I had a few different people ask here as far as how it was made. There's a whole lot of little pieces to it using After Effects and really mainly Cinema 4D. So we're going to go through some of those. I mean, I would be here for days trying to explain it step by step. So I'm going to try to go through at least some of the bigger sections and the ones that are the most fun to me and how they were made. So if you have any questions as we're jumping in, then feel free to throw them up in the little chat feature, and we'll try to get those answers. So I'm just going to sort of plow through it and see, and feel free to stop me as I go, and I'll just kind of share with you the process. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually need to open up the Premiere project, and for me this is sort of the biggest piece of the puzzle, is to figure out what music you're going to use, especially if it's something that needs to be super rhythmic, and then cut that down to the length it needs to be, and then try to piece in the script with that music. So I believe for this one we use Soundstripe, which is another great website for stock music. So that was a super cool track that I just fell in love with right away and decided to give that a try, and sent that to Nick, and he thought it was perfect. So threw that in there, excuse me, and started editing it down to try to fit within about a minute and a half or so, because after about that you're going to start losing people's interest. So once we threw that into Premiere, this is really the start of, let me see if I can find the, I may not have it in here anymore, but what I would typically do is whenever we're making let me maybe open up the other one and see if this is it. Whenever I'm making some sort of animation or a bumper or something, then I try to block it out in Premiere with just basic title cards. So yeah, I don't think I have it in here. So we'll just, let's see. I'll just show you kind of an example of what I would do. So again, start with editing the music. So try to cut this down to really cut down the biggest pieces that are the most, the dynamic and creative. Then I would start taking the script, which we had. I'd thrown he had the idea. I think he had the idea out there of, oh boy, I'm probably not going to have it on here as well, but I think he had thrown out one of the ideas as far as this sort of going through like verbs of Sunday chasing and worship rehearsing and all these types of things. So we started piecing the script together like that to see how well it would play. And so then I would go through and drop my music in here and then just make title line of We Often Find Ourselves. And I may have that content edit and see what it looks like. Let's see. Yeah, so this is what it would come out to be here. And this is just in Premiere with the music.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
This is just to work on the pacing. In my head, it's together in the right place. What's going to be happening in my head. Super fast. But once I see this is really good on the single plan, does this work? Because once I get into this process, there's really not a whole lot of going back. Because once you're sort of locking that picture down. First step, getting through this, going through the entire script just as it would be here, and that was the very first thing. So once this was signed off, I would take this, I would throw it into After Effects and use that as sort of my storyboard, if you will. All right, let's move on. Can get out of this. So keep me posted if I need to get louder or anything like that. Chatting here. Let me know if it gets better. I just bumped up the gain on my mic, so hopefully that works a little bit better. I'll try to keep the music playing down to a minimum. Okay, so let's dive on in. The first chunk of this, which we had kind of played a little bit in, was this is long. Where did it go? Super long countdown. Nothing fancy. Going through here, there's tons of little scripts you can use for making countdowns and things. So I'm not going to get into all that. But I wanted to introduce this cool little countdown here as it sort of transitions into this sort of 3D type thing. And what I sent him to was the process of, let's see if I can pull up my board here. Let's see. So this was the mood board I would send him, which is just right up their alley as far as their brands goes. And I just love all these different things. And this was really a big part of the inspirational process. So I love this one here and want to just recreate this pretty much from from scratch and try to find a font that would sort of match that, and then put that into Cinema 4D. So I'll jump into Cinema 4D a little bit. Let's see if I can have that one here. So far I haven't really taught you much anything, so I'm going to try to jump into it. Create a One Day Opener, countdown. Let's see here. Let's try this one. Let's see. Okay, so here's this countdown. So again, I'm going to fly through these somewhat quickly, just because there's so much to cover. So let me see if this is it here. Wait a second. Okay. So here was this countdown here. Basically what I did with this one was threw it into, this is basically a text layer inside of Cinema 4D, and then make sure it was super super thin. See if I can fly in here and see this, so we can see what it really looks like here. So let me maybe pull this apart. Oops. Copy paste. Just delete all of this and maybe I can show you here. So it's just a basic text layer, throwing it into an extrude object. Again, I'm not going to go too much into the details of what that is, but this is what the text layer would look like, and then you basically put this into what they call an extrude object, and it gives it more a polygon type of vibe. And I could make this super thick if I wanted to, but then it would start really starting to fall apart. So you can see now it's got some really big depth in there, but I just wanted it to be nice and flat, so we kept that super duper small, and added a lot of different as far as subdividing all this stuff so that it would wave super clean and not get all janky and jaggy, and then just added a wind deformer to that, and I had a little bit of turbulence on there and a little bit of frequency, so it would cause this wavy, windy motion on top of that. So that was really kind of the way I made that countdown. And then let me back up here. One thing that I love doing is using just nice big wide angle lenses. And if you're not really familiar with Cinema 4D, it's basically just a place where you can make your own environment completely just from scratch. So there's so much you can do with it, and that I haven't even begun to scratch the surface, but basically you can just build your own little world. So we would have a camera here, and I can just tell this camera, what lens I want. So this is a focal length of 8, so it's super, super wide, just to give this a really grand look as it's animating. Just super, super big, almost never having it really on the screen at the same time. But if you went to something super long, like a super long lens, you'd almost get this. I have to zoom way out here. You get this almost like you're looking at a landscape or something. So not quite as cool. It really just depends on what I need you use it for. But I love that super long lens. This was an 8, which is crazy, crazy long. Okay, so I would export this as just a black and white, and whenever you render it, it would just be a black and white image, and that comes out as an image sequence. And let me go back to After Effects. So it's still hard you guys still having a hard time hearing me? Let's see. Is my voice clear, or is it coming through this microphone that I'm using, or is it coming through my desktop? Does it sound like I'm in a room, or does it sound nice and professional? So just let me know that as I keep working. Okay, let's move on here. Let's just cut into the animation process. All right, so again, it's all about this music that I used to try to follow along with that beat as it's kind of ticking through, and it would flash on those beats, start going super fast from 16th notes, probably 30 seconds, threw a little Creative Church logo in there. So this is just a typing expression for this here. I'm gonna go in here, and here's just your text. But I think I found this online somewhere. There's a expression you can post. You can copy and paste into. Turn this up a little bit more. All right, Alex Rodriguez says you can hear it good. Thank you, sir. Still cranking the volume, so hopefully it'll get a little bit better. All right. So for here, I think I just Googled typing text with that with the cursor flashing on there, and this was one I found, and I was able to copy and paste this into our expression. You basically just put this into the source text. So feel free to screenshot that and type it all in, or Google that and find it. So then you can sort of change the speed. It speeds up and then backs down like that, so it feels like it's typing. Okay, much better now. Good. Okay, not going to spend too much time on that one. So this part here was super fun. I thought it worked really well with the music. Let me flip this down a little bit here. And so usually, and before I jump too far in, usually what I do is build out scenes within After Effects and then piece those together inside of one main timeline. So this is sort of my main timeline, and then everything else is embedded here within these pre-comps that are scenes. Before, I think early on when you start After Effects, you start putting every little piece of your project and all your layers into one composition, and not trying to grasp the idea of pre-comps can really slow you down, because then you'll have hundreds and hundreds of layers and it's hard to find things. So this is a great way to sort of group things together, have them do their own thing in their own composition, and then embed that into another thing. So it keeps it nice and clean, in my opinion. So anyways, let's jump into here. So this effect here was, let's see here, it kind of types out that same thing we just talked about. And then I have that same line just go to a stroke, and that's a text layer. And then to make this stroke layer, just do it in the character panel. And that's this little option right here. You can turn that off or turn it on. Oops. Just like that. And you can turn the main fill off, so it gives that stroke outline. And then this just pops in with the music, a nice big text layer of the creative. Sort of flashes, and there's nothing special there. It's just me cutting up those layers into pieces and having them flash with the music. And then inside of, I don't think it happens in here, is when it talks about the creative vacuum, I wanted to sort of give it this vacuum vibe. So let's see, I think that effect is happening on top of this layer here. So if you hit U on the keyboard, you will get all of the keyframes that are set on your After Effects project or any layer. Just hitting U reveals any keyframe that you have. So I used several different things to make this. Let's open that up here, Effects Controls. So we have flow motion, and this is me not knowing exactly what any of these really do. I just start going down my layer. I would click on this and go to Effect, and I knew it was going to be some sort of distort, and just worked my way down the list until I found something that would make really what I wanted it to do. So I don't really think it was. I think the displacement map, let's see, is just creating some distortion there. I'll talk about that in a second. Liquify, smear, I'm just going to turn them on and off so you can see what's happening. Smear was the big one. Flow motion, I don't really think did anything. So smear, you can just go in and you basically tell it where you want these little points to react, and it just smears it all over the place. So it looked pretty cool. So setting those keyframes to where it sort of rocked back and forth with the music. I think I made all sorts of keyframes on accident. And just moved them around, so you can kind of see these 2 points. I'm not sure if you see it, but these 2 points are just kind of moving back and forth as that music does its thing, and then have them all suck into this one little spot here. And I think that might have been smear as well. Let's see. Maybe that was the flow motion side of things, is where it sort of so it has these little knots, I guess, and I just pulled it that. And that's all just going in there and starting to play with what these little settings do. I never can just hardly walk into a animation and know exactly what these things are going to do. So I just started playing around with what they would do, and usually it's just a bunch of happy accidents. So all right, moving on. Okay, so it kind of sucks into that little moment, and this comes up. Let's talk about this. Let's see. So there's no keyframes on this one. I'm just going to jump in here, and this is just a nice, simple white solid. Let's see. So I have this big white solid here, and the keyframes are its position and rotation, and just rocking back and forth. And this one, although it seems simple, it actually takes a lot of time to get it feeling just right, especially with the music. So to do something like that, let me just turn these off and try to do a quick example. I would do layer, I would make a new solid, I would just do a white layer for now, and hit OK. So this is just a plain white solid. Probably move this down here. I think I made it pretty big, so we'll just make this pretty large for now. And then you want to figure out exactly where it's going to be rocking from, and that's your anchor point here. So I think I'd probably leave it there for now. But if you want to move it, you could just hit Y on the keyboard and move that up. And then I would add my text layer. So I'm going to hit Command T for a text layer, and we'll put life. Can't remember what it was, but life balancing. Okay, you can turn off that stroke there. I don't think I spelled it right, but it's fine. Let's see. Okay, so then I would probably put this somewhere around here, and I will connect this to my main solid using this little pick whip. And so now whatever this white solid does, my text is going to do. So I think I used my position tool, and let me move this down to maybe here. I would hit P on I'd hit my layer, hit P, get the position tool, and then probably will put this for somewhere around 1 second, pull this down, so now it's making that position fly up if I were to render that out. That looks very robotic and not very fun, and this is where it comes into play, where you have to really finesse the move. And so I would highlight my little keyframes there. I have a little shortcut for the easy ease, or you can right click and do keyframe assistant easy ease, and then you go into this little graph editor here, and let's see, gotta highlight them first. And you can change your speed by going to this guy and speed graph, and then this is basically telling what the speed's going to be. So I can pull this so it goes super fast and then really goes slow. So if we watch it back, it kind of ramps up and goes really, really slow as it comes to an end there. So then once that one's sort of set, I can start messing around with the rotation, and I'm hitting R on the keyboard for that. And let's just see what happens here. And this is going to be a quick, nasty example because I spent a pretty good amount of time trying to get it just right. But you can kind of see how it would flip, and then I would have my letters then slide on their own, because they're connected to this white solid, but also can have the ability to move them on their own. So I can set a position for on that text, and then as that tilts, I can drag it and slide it down. And let's do our graph editor there. So it would probably start really slow because it's got to gain momentum as it's sliding down. So you kind of get the sense of it there. I can maybe move this over. Boom. Probably even faster than that. So it would take a lot of just finessing. Yeah, so that would rotate that way, and then I'd quickly flip it to go this way. And that would probably be, again, tweaking this. Something like that. Let's see what happens. Boom. So again, terrible, really rough example, but that kind of gives you the idea of what that would do. Okay, so that's that little section there. Moving on. Let's see. All right, so this next part was the task list that pops up here. And while I probably didn't need to do this inside of Cinema 4D, I did anyways. Because I knew, like, this was pretty simple, but I knew I wanted to transition to this moment here. And I wasn't going to get this inside of After Effects very easily. So I use, let's go into Cinema 4D. See if I can open up. Let's see, task list. Task list and button pushing. I think I was able to put music into it. So I had to really get that timing just right. Close this out here. All right, so let's see. Then I used I believe this was just a cloner with some cubes. Yep. Let me just open up a new project to explain sort of what a cloner is. So I would make a cube. This is a very just from scratch. So make a simple cube, stretch that size down pretty good bit. And I wanted this to be sort of my list. I'd make that super thin. So you're really just looking at this rectangle here. And then you can throw that into a cloner, which would be here. And this is just going to basically clone that cube. So you drag your cube into the cloner, and it starts basically cloning it depending on how many you really want. So we can do a lot, but I don't want it on the Y. So I turn that off. I think I did it. Let's see. What's my problem here? 0. Oops. There we go. And maybe do it on the Z axis. Just like that. And would have that animate, I think, based on the position of this cube's anchor points. Just like we did with rotate in After Effects, this also is its anchor point. So I think I would make that editable, which is just hitting C. And I know I'm just blazing through what all this really is, but this just goes to show what really goes into it. So make that editable. Let's see if this works here. And then I could keyframe my scale. Let's see here. How did I do it? Let's see. Cloner. I think I used the plane, so I'd use a plane. Let's see. Window. I would add what they call an effector to that animation, and then I can control a lot of things with it. So where it goes, I can control the scale, which is probably what I did. Yeah. So I'd basically just animate this plane, give it some, I think maybe some sort of linear field. So basically it's a fall off for that plane. So as it kind of moves down, it would animate those lines out. So I'd probably have to go super, let's see, pretty much to -1. And so I'd animate this guy to fly up there. So if I did that, let me move this down here. One thing I love about doing the cloner is you can get another effector on it to give this little delay effect. So right now it just flies up that list, but if I added maybe let's do the cloner effector, this delay effector here, and I can tell it to do a spring. So it sort of flips. This is sort of a weird way of doing it, but you can see it's sort of giving this bounciness to it. I have to change my parameters, but you get the idea, as it gives this nice little, can crank that way up so it gets out of control. Looks a little bit ridiculous, but you get the idea. Super organic, and what's what I love about Cinema 4D is it makes that stuff happen super easy for you once you sort of figure out how to use those things, versus doing a bunch of little keyframes inside of After Effects. So we'll do that, and then I did the same thing with the button section. So this sort of comes out, flies down, and now one thing I love about this feeling here and these are, again, this is just the button. I won't go through this too much, but this is basically the same thing with the, I would make this shape inside of Cinema 4D and then throw that into a cloner. So for instance, just delete all this here. I don't want a cube. I would make like a cylinder, drop that way down, make a torus, scale this way down, something like that. So then there is my basic, layout of a button. I could throw that into a group, and then I could put that into a cloner as well. This way. And then I can tell it, I want to do it in a grid. And let's see, let's see, 5, 1, 5. So then I can do this big grid of buttons. Okay. And then as far as the texture goes, that's another big part of this is you would add some textures, and for here you do what they call materials. And so this one I think was just a simple what they call cell shader, I believe. You under luminance, and I'm just flying through this. Oops. Sketch and tune cell. So it sort of give you this two-tone type vibe, and you could tell it basically where you want the whether it's coming from the light or from the camera angle. But that's how it would get that look of this right here. So just really harsh shadows and 2 or 3 colors at most. All right, moving on. So one thing that I used a lot in this project was the perspective camera. So one thing that it just makes for some reason just feels right with the Creative Church style, I guess. So if you make a camera, just like we talked about a minute ago, so now I'm active in this camera and I can move around. But you can change this all based on your like a real camera. So if I went to an 18 lens, this is super wide millimeter lens, and it gives you a certain look. But if you went to something like a 85, you don't have so much of that fisheye look, and it's just a longer lens, and gives you a totally different style. So you see this all the time in movies, but you don't quite realize what it's doing to your brain, probably, or how it's affecting the story or the script. But I've learned this just with working with some guys that do film of why this matters so much. Beforehand, I would just in After Effects do add a camera, keep it whatever lens was on it, 35, and just go with it. But once I learned the really big difference in what these lenses would do, then I started playing with them. But this one, I would use what they call a parallel lens. So if you are familiar with let me see if I can pull it up really quick. Sort of the SimCity vibe. So let's see, something really. If you've ever seen this little intro here, this is using a parallel lens. So it's almost just like a really, really, really long lens. So that gives you what that looks like. So I use that for here, and it just makes a really cool effect. Almost just like a really long lens. But the more you play with it, the more you realize the difference it's making. So anyways, that's what I used for this animation. So I knew I could do this in After Effects, but I wanted to shift it as soon as that music hit to that angle right there. Almost felt very like a factory assembly line, which is what I wanted this to feel like, where it was we're all just button pushers in some sense. So okay, so then that little animation there was all Cinema 4D. And this was more all After Effects, so I'm going to go into this file saving one here. So here we have, we have the mouse coming in to click, some more text layers, second window, loading, let's see. So this one moved really fast, and it's basically just a bunch of shape layers on top of one another, forming their scene. So if I turned all these off, give you a little example here. Where are those buttons coming from? So let me just hide all of these, to be honest. All right, so if I made a shape layer, I'm just doing that with my shape layer tool. Click and drag, make me a nice little box. And I want to tell it I want this to be white. And no stroke. And now we have our little box. So I would really make these 3D layers here with this little 3D button. And then let me make another one. Let me just duplicate this. And I will make this, oops, maybe a little bit of a gray. And I could resize this down. And this again is just a really rough example. But then I would have these sort of animate into 3D space. So if you go to active camera, maybe left, you can see where these are in 3D space. So this is my main shape here. So if I want to pull this back a little bit, and now this one is my top layer there. So think about if the camera's over here and it's looking this way, this is we're just stepped off to the side of this little scene so we can see the layers, almost like a backdrop to a stage, like you're on the side of a stage. So then I would go and animate these. So I would want to lock, first I really built it out exactly how I wanted it to look. So I added all my little layers, those little dots and things, the little scroll bars, put all that stuff in there. And then once I felt really good about the way that it was laid out, let me pull up make sure I'm not missing anything on the chat here. Once I felt good about the way it was laid out, then I would lock it down as far as the position and rotation, and then animate it out. So for instance, for this top square, I would want this one to sort of maybe rotate from the side over here. In order to do that, I would need to move this anchor point. So I'd hit Y on the keyboard, drag that anchor point to the side, and then for this first one here, maybe I want it to flip down, so I'd maybe pull this up here somewhere around there. So if this was right where I wanted it to be, I would take my playhead somewhere down here around 1 or 2 seconds, probably 2, and then set some position keyframes. So I'd hit P on the keyboard for both of those, lock that down, and then I would also lock down the rotation because I knew I was going to be messing with the rotation as well. And really pretty much just the orientation is what I would mess with. And again, you can hit U on the keyboard to see all your keyframes that you've set. So I'd move forward. And then I would probably, let's see, I'd probably do my rotation first. So I would click on the layer I wanted to mess with, hit W on that keyboard, and then rotate. I'd take my mouse and put it on the axis that I wanted to rotate. So, if I just clicked and drag it, I'm going to get this wonkiness, and I don't want that. So I would put my cursor right on top of the one I wanted to mess with, like this Y, and just rotate it that way. So maybe something like that, kind of off screen like that. And then I can move those in Z space a little bit, maybe just fly it out of the way. Let's just see. This is gonna be a bad example, but same thing here. I can rotate that maybe backwards. Then maybe I want this to fly in past the camera. You can click and then you can hold down Shift and it'll move pretty fast. But maybe I want it to come from the bottom of the screen. This is going to be terrible, but you'll get an idea. Then I always highlight my keyframes, and if I want it to move fast and go really slow, then I get that graph editor, click and highlight, slide that down, and I want this to fly in as fast as it can. This is going to be abysmal, but let's go. Okay, so you view, let's see what's happening here. That's sort of that. This film editing section there. I've turned everything off, so let me delete these. Turn everything back on. So just a whole lot of keyframes. of things moving around. But it all just comes down to moving that anchor point to where you need it to be based on what that animation is. And it's really all position and rotation. And then I think I may have added, let's see, a drop shadow to that layer. So I got this sort of hard shadow there. Let's see. Yeah. So there's two ways you can do a drop shadow. You can go to the effect and let's see, perspective, and add a drop shadow that way. Or you can go to layer and layer styles and click on drop shadow, and that will give it to you right down here. And then you have maybe a few more options that I like. I like this one better, but I just made it, not have this soft look to it, but just kept it nice and hard and rigid, and then change your distance based on wherever you want it to be. Gave it a little bit more depth. Same thing with up here. Just gave it a tad bit more depth. But that's it. It's all really just, it's so much just about finessing those keyframes and using that graph editor a ton to get it to be just right. All right, so let's move on. So that was exporting, script writing. This one was kind of cool because it was really like the only section that used a different type of font, but I like the vibe of it. So let me talk about how I made some of these things. These are fun little elements to make and pretty easy, and adds a nice little touch to it. So the first thing I did was added just a white background, which you can see right here, and then I brought in a paper texture. And if I open this up, you can see this is what the paper texture looks like. But I just needed a little bit of texture, and so if you look pretty close, you can see just a little bit. And the way I made that was just adding some adjustment layers to it, or some effects to it. So I did a hue and saturation. So let's go to a little effect, color correction, and hue and saturation right there. And then I would, let's see, I may have just done some sort of, yeah. So I dropped my saturation pretty much all the way down, so there's no color in there. And then I did some different blending modes to create that look. So it's a normal. Let's see what it looks like. So that's the look there, and that looks pretty terrible. So let's go to, I'm gonna hide these things. Oh well, guess you'll just see those. That's okay. So, but then just mess around with some blending modes, and you can go through those with Shift plus and minus to get through some different looks. But I got to pin light, and I guess that worked pretty well. Another thing I might do is if I was going to be normal, and let's say I scaled this up. Another great way to add some different looks with textures would be to add a effect, color correction, and levels, and then really adjust these to just pull out the black and white values from this image. So I use levels, I use selective color a ton, and I use hue and saturation a pretty good bit. So I would really crush all these text there. So now you're sort of getting that texture there, and it adds a pretty nice touch to it. So yeah, I could maybe bump that opacity way down or whatever. So that was how I would get that another way of actually doing it. But I went to pin light. No, I can't find it. Pin light. And it just added just a little bit of texture there. All right, so these line scribble, how would I do that? So I went to the line scribble here, and this is basically just me going back and forth super fast with my pen tool. So if I turn this off, I would do my shape layer. So I'd hit G on the keyboard for my shape layer, and this is just, I can just start drawing, some sort of path. But I don't want to fill, so I'm going to click on fill and turn that off. I'm going to go to stroke. I'm going to bump that up to white, and we'll just do 1 for now, 1 little pixel. And then I knew I just wanted to be scribbling out a word, so I just started going all over the place and had no rhyme or reason to what I was doing. Try not to have any curves on there, so I have to redo it a little bit. Again, just no real order here. So that would make this look right there, and then I would have to animate that on. So if you have a shape layer and even text layers, you can hit U on the keyboard a couple of times. And there's this little section right here for adding a few different little elements to it. So a bunch of different animation options. But I use trim paths a pretty good bit, and so I click on trim paths, and basically that will sort of create this stroke effect. So let me bump up the size so you can see what's going on. So, you know, it's saying where do you want it to start and where do you want it to end. So if I wanted it to end at 1 second, I would lock that keyframe down right there, and then I can pull this back to 0 and then pull this back to 0%. And so now over the course of time, it's going to go from 0% to 100. And again, you can keyframe that, easy ease, little graph editor on there, however you want to do it, and then let it scribble out. So then in the script writing one, I also added a turbulent displace to it and also a fill. So let's see. I added just a color overlay to it of just some red, and then a turbulent displace to sort of give it more of a pencil writing look. So if I turn that off, it's just going to be very you know, sharp and even. But if you add a turbulent displace, maybe bump up the size to show you what it's doing, is it sort of makes it sort of scribbly and jagged. So I just added just a little bit of that to give it sort of a pencil vibe. Okay. And then to sort of get this movement here where it flies back like that. And these little lines and arrows and corners are really doing the exact same thing. So it's just a shape layer that I have draw out, little arrow, and then it closes up. So playing around with these little animation options are super cool. So the actual movement here, let's talk about that. I made everything 3D. I had this little camera in here. So in order to do that, I would do, let me just make a new composition to show you that effect. So let's say I had a square and I wanted the camera to sort of fly out from it. I would make that layer a 3D layer. I could add you can do a camera, you could do a null object, but we'll just do the camera for now. And so this is where you can start messing around with the lensing and stuff, but we'll just keep it as is. But now, since this is 3D, the camera is going to see it as a 3D object. So I could go in here, select my position. Usually when I'm doing the camera, position and orientation, and then so if this is where I want it to land, I could maybe slide this down and take my camera. I think you hit C on the keyboard for that camera tool, and let's see, I want the zoom, which is this little option here. Push in like that, and now I'd highlight these keyframes, get that easy ease, and pull that graph editor all the way back and make it fly out super fast. So, boom. So that's pretty much that effect, and it just really elevates the design. So then you can maybe come in here, do a little rotation. This is just for fun. Maybe you want that to go like, oops, let's see, I want to turn that on though. Just, yeah, let's see. So flip it 180 degrees, then have this start slow, go real fast, and then go slow again. Boom, and then rotate. Okay, so that's sort of the overall layout of how, you know, the nuts and bolts of this section here with the script writing. So moving on. Let's see, is hashtagging? So hashtagging is next. Hashtagging was all Cinema 4D. So I'm going to go back to my project here. Let's see, hashtagging, I think is maybe number 2. I played with this one for a while to get this to work. If you have any questions as I'm going through, just please post them or let me know, and I'll stop what I'm doing. Okay, so this is again using that parallel camera. So you can see here I have my camera and have it set to parallel. It just adds a really cool effect that I just love. So here I would do let's see, I'm trying to figure out if I can lay this out again. All right, so let me just make a new one here. I would make a text layer. Text. I made a hashtag. Boom. And then I added that to a cloner. Let's see if I can make that like bold. Cloner. Threw this into the cloner. Oops. Like that. I think I may have given it some. Oh, I needed to make that a MoGraph text. MoGraph text. This already gives it some depth right away. And that's what I want to do. So I put that into the cloner. Maybe bump that size up. And then I would do, I believe I did grid array. I think I only needed one of those. And I made that text really deep. Something like that. And then I would add an effector to that cloner, which was a random effector. So I think that's what I did. This will at least give you the example. So, you know, added that camera. So this will probably give you an example of what that camera will do. So I'm just going to bump this randomness of this thing a little bit. Maybe add a few more clones. Let's go 6. And then you can space those out a pretty good bit. Okay, so I needed to add that camera. So add a little camera here. Turn the camera on with that button. Go to parallel. And now it gives this weird SimCity thing going on. So I've tried to figure out what angle I wanted, and then did the same thing with the hashtag. So I would make my text layer hashtagging. Pull this forward here. Obviously use the Creative Church fonts all throughout the project so that it would match. I think I put this somewhere up here. And it was looking so much cooler than this font. But then the thing with the text, the texture on this was, let me just turn this one off, trying to get it to, so if I made a new material, let's see, just a white, turn this off. So I'm gonna do luminance, so there's no sort of shadowing on that. Obviously you can't really see that. So I think I did, let's see, let me go back to the main one. So I guess I had 2 different layers there. So I did a sketch and tune, so it would give you this create new shader, maybe sketch and tune, sketch material. And then I would put that on here. Let me just delete this one for now. And my color would be white. Okay. And then I would tell it shading, no shading, off maybe. So eventually I would get to where I would just have just these outlines, and then I would put that another text layer on top of that. That was pretty much no depth whatsoever. Oops. So maybe 1. And then this would live right on top, just that, and just be a solid color there. So, and then really just have that animate out, so where it flies out like that. And then these things are sort of randomly moving, which is just a, let me turn this back on. You can do your cloner, and you can go to MoGraph and shader, and you can tell it to sort of just randomly move. So I don't want the scale, but I wanted the position, and I think I wanted the Z to move. Let's see. Could have been random. Let's see, shading, custom shader. So then you tell it, okay, I want it to be a noise. I tell my animation to be, let's go 1. And if I hit play, let's see what happens. So now you can see what I'm seeing. They're just moving. And this is just a what they call like a noise layer inside of Cinema 4D, and it animates. And there's a bunch of different ones you can use, you know, different styles of. Let's see if I stop it, if it'll update. Yeah, different styles of textures that are basically moving it around. You can change the size, and it all starts messing around with what your animation is. So, anyways, that's sort of how I made that. I would again export those as image sequences and drop those in to After Effects Oops. Hashtag. So this is just an image sequence. So it just do, you know, every frame was a picture, and then it pieces that together when you import it into After Effects. Okay. Moving on. This wasn't anything too fancy. This was just a model of a microphone, and within a image. Again, just exporting the image sequence using that cell shader inside of Cinema 4D to get that look based on the lighting there. So if I went to, let's just see here, worship maybe. Yeah. So here's the actual animation there. Boom. Not a whole lot going on, but I would add this type of shader to it, and then tell it I want you to base the reflections and the material on the lights. So I'd turn on lights and then specular, and that's going to add this sort of reflection. So if I take my light and then I would move it around, let me zoom out here and get, this is the actual scene altogether. Why I have such a big white background, I don't know. But if I could take my light, which is hard to see, turn this off. Here's my light here. If I move this around, my reflections on this microphone will change based on where that light is, I believe. Yeah, so now it's all over the place. So anyways, that's kind of how that would work. And then I would attach this blank plane to it. That's so that I could tell it, basically you just need to tell Cinema 4D, or yeah, tell Cinema 4D, hey, I'm going to be putting this in After Effects, and you tell it I want to add this little tag, which so you can right click and you can add certain tags to your object or whatever, and say, hey, I'm going to be compositing this in After Effects. I want you to add this little external compositing tag to it, and you can set a color to it. And so whenever I save this and I import it into After Effects, it will recognize this plane as a object inside of After Effects. And that was so that I could connect my text layer to it. So I would go into After Effects, and let's see if it's in here. No, it's not in here. But it would basically drop a plane into here, and then I can say, hey, I want this to be linked to that plane, and so that it moves exactly with the text. So if I wanted to go in there and change it, we could say, I'm not sure why I had to do it upside down, but it's just part of it. If I want to say worship leading, oops, and go back, now that would update. All right, there we go. Moving on. This one I won't really spend a lot of time on. This is really the same kind of stuff with using those shape layers and having them do sort of just a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, these are just basic boxes that are sliding back and forth and lines. You can see all these are just tons and tons of shape layers that have some sort of animation on those. So I'm doing certain scale animations that are going on. Let me hit here. Let's see. So these are just kind of bouncing up and down. I think that's just based on a wiggle expression maybe. Let's see. Let's see what's causing those. Yep, so I was able to figure out, let's see. This took me some time. And this, anytime I'm dealing with expressions, if it's not wiggle, then I don't know what it is. And so I have to Google how that actually works. But I'm just telling it, hey, I want you to wiggle the y-axis of this little bar here. And so I'm just telling it randomly, every 5 frames, move it 20 pixels up and down, and just kind of randomly does it. So that was the goal there, to just make this look like a very minimal video editing timeline with shifting things around. Again, that's all just using those keyframes in that graphic editor. Coffee drinking a little bit here was also the same process with doing a cloner. So let me open up coffee. So here you can see it flies out, boom, and it rotates. So it's getting that rotation and that is all happening with a plane effector. So let me get out of here so you can see all my all my coffee cups here. So if I turn this off, nothing really is going to happen to it. Oh boy. So I have one plane effector that's the spherical field. It's doing a little rotation. Let's see what this one does. Oh, this one is just blocking out. So if I turn this off, basically I needed to make some sort of block in the middle of this and use a plane effector to tell it, hey, within this box, this little pink box, I want every little coffee cup that comes in contact with that box to be basically 0 in size, and so it would sort of cancel those out, and that way I could build the coffee drinking and it would sit right inside of it. So then with that little flip of the music, boom, that is using a plane effector with a spherical field. So if I built that from scratch, let's see if I can do it super fast. Most of the time this is me doing trial and error. So I would click on my cloner, I would go to effectors, actually no, I'd make a plane. Let me turn this off. Click on here, MoGraph, effector, plane, call this test, and then I would need to say, all right, what's this plane gonna do? Because right now I think it's just gonna move, let's see, this up here, maybe. See if it does anything. Let's see. Cloner. Do I have a delay on? Let's see. I would tell it a spherical field. There it goes. The effector or parameter would not be position, but it would be rotation. So maybe like 180 and 90. Let's see what happens there. All right, why doesn't that do anything? Started to. Oh, it's super small. Let's see. There it goes. Boom. So now I would have that animate. I guess I'd really have just animate out, so I could set my size to maybe 0. Lock in that keyframe. Come out here. Bump this up to like 1800. And then boom. It would rotate those out. So it's basically just saying this is sort of a force field, really, and whatever's inside a sphere or a box or a cylinder or whatever you tell it to be, it will rotate those based on what you tell it. So you could do size, you could do parameter, or it means position. So if I could maybe say I want this to go to 500, it's going to launch those up in the air, sort of. So boom, there's just so many cool things you can do with it. So that was how I eventually made that. But again, that was just taking a coffee cup, throwing it into a cloning object and telling it I want a big grid of coffee cups, and then setting those planes to be the rotation. From there, it was really just getting that lighting just right. So whenever they would rotate, it would actually look like a coffee cup, and you could tell what it was, because there's really, one color on this to make it look right. So hopefully that was easy to figure out what that was. All right, moving on. This here was the same thing. I knew I wanted to try to get this realistic time-lapse type of shadow, and that was all done inside of Cinema 4D as well. So let me see if I can open that up. Most of it was done in Cinema 4D, really just trying to get that let's see what happens here. Trying to get that quick rotation of the sun and to see what it would do. Let's see, back up here a little bit. So if you back out here, this is really what you're looking at, is we have this ball, and then let's see where the sun is. Here's my light. I think the light's like right in the middle of that, and it's just an infinite light. And so it's sort of pointing this direction. That's the way the sun is pointing, and so it's just meant to be a quick time lapse, sort of the sun rising, it's midday, and then it quickly sets. And I would need to set that to super hard shadows in order for that light to cast shadows over this globe. So for instance, if I render, you can see I have just a big plane, then a globe that is getting that direct sunlight from the left coming this way and casting a massive shadow. So if I were to go in here, so that's almost like midday, the sun is right above him. And then if I wanted to go and move this light around, I'd start getting, you can now see the light shining from the top right down to the bottom. So I just wanted to get that nice realistic movement. I wouldn't be able to get that in After Effects very easily. And so from there, I took these little other little pieces here that added to it and just did all that in After Effects. So went into the time lapse. Let's see here. I really hope this is helpful for people because I'm just booking through it, but thought it might be interesting. From here, I have a clock, and this is just a few different layers. I have my, let's see, where are those? Sort of my hands here that are spinning around. Oh, you can't see them that way. So I have a minute hand flying around really fast, and then the hour hand going really slow. And that's not accurate by any means. It's just to show, time going by. And then I would add another shape layer here, and it's just rotating almost like a sundial. So to make that, I would just do a shape layer. Let me turn these off. Turn this on. Go up here. If I click and hold down that shape layer, I can get a few options, and I do my ellipse tool, and I would just draw a circle. And then I would go, let's see, let's make sure it's like dead center. I also make sure it's a 3D layer. And now I would just rotate this randomly. So I'd hit R on the keyboard for rotation, click on the orientation, move somewhere down here, and then just do a completely random animation or, rotation setting there. And then render that out, and you can see it sort of does a random thing. You may even want to change some of these other ones down here as well, because it needs to do it several times. Right now it's just going to like the shortest point you have. So it might just be a bunch of random stuff here. This is going to be super fast. Yeah, way too fast. But you get the idea. So this was maybe 4. This was 6. There you go. And I kept them pretty thin. This kind of doesn't quite work because it's super. It doesn't really extrude like it does in Cinema 4D. So I would probably just make that like a 1-point stroke and make that spin around like that. You could also do go into those same settings. Let me figure out which one it was. Offset paths, maybe. Let me think. I think it's offset paths. Nope. I think it's stroke. Let's see. Contents, ellipsis, stroke. And I would make it a dotted line. So I'd do just like the cap would be round. And then you can add dashes. Let's see, add a little plus sign here. I think you have to add like 3. I always forget what the right setting is, but you can kind of see now I'm getting some patterns here. And I can never, ever remember the exact setting for that. But you sort of get some dotted lines there, playing around with those. So yeah, that's it. All smoke and mirrors, really. Then put some text in there. Have my text, let's see, this text right there. I think I have it sort of mask out. Maybe not, since it's actually straight up black and straight up white, so it doesn't really have to mask out. But it appears as if it is coming up from behind that globe, and it is not. So that was a way to kind of grab that, got that 3D effect there, was Cinema 4D and those little lines there. All right, keeping on trucking through. Here, this Sunday chasing. This was just all in After Effects. Really nothing fancy. This is just making a lot of boxes and shapes and having them sort of fade in one by one. So I'd go through and make really just one box, and then you can do several different alignment options. So let's see here. Let's do a little fake one. I can make a box, and then you could maybe duplicate it a few times and just add a few duplications. So I have one here, which is the very bottom. Then this one, let's see, I need to add, you can, like, as long as you have a, like this one on the left, far left, and whatever one's on the far right's the top or bottom, then you can take everything in between and use your align option in window, align, apparently it's open, there it is, and you can distribute those based on, this probably needs some more spacing on those. Sort of distribute those evenly based on what you need. So maybe I could delete that, pull it in a little tighter, adjust them that way. Then you go in and I just would add, I think I maybe just made one and then did an opacity adjustment on that. T, so it went from 0 to 100, just like that. Make a bunch of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one maybe could come down here. Align those. They all fade together, but then you can sort of stagger them a little bit, and you don't have to do opacity for every single layer. It's already done. You just got to move them. Sort of goes in a row there. All right. Other than that, then you just put I could maybe pick the ones I wanted. So let's say if I wanted this one here, I could say I want a fill on that. So I'd click on the fill, hit OK, and now I have that filled in. And I would put a text layer on top of that, Command T with my text tool. And that was probably Gotham or something like that. Throw that up there. Change my color. Boom. Something like that. Just fades in. Built the calendar around that whole process. Had a few of these little lines here animating. And again, that is nothing but some shape layers with that trim paths on it. So if I hit G on the keyboard, drew some points here, and then added, I don't want to fill on it, so I turn that fill off. Have the stroke on it. Go into those, hit U a couple times on the keyboard, click on add, trim paths, toggle that down, and then basically set these keyframes here. So from 0 to 100. And then somewhere right around here, I would hit that start keyframe, come over here, and then push it through. So it's sort of like, depending on how old you are, you may have had Snake on your cell phone back in the day in the early 2000s, and it's a lot like Snake. You eat the little apple and you get longer and longer and longer, and you waste your entire college career on Snake on your phone. So here it goes, sort of draws out, goes super fast, and then it's going to follow here. Zoop. So that's how you make those little lines. So I'll just decorate my calendar with some of those little pieces. All right. Close out some of these. All right, so this was using X particles. I don't think you could really pull this off very well with using any sort of particular After Effects particle generator, because you really get a lot of really cool dynamics in here with these particles. So this is, again, all in Cinema 4D. So I'm going to go in here. Let's open that up and play around with that. Let's see. I think it was under Particle Crash. Let's see if this is it. Yeah. Now, it can take a long time to sort of process. But here's what you're kind of looking at is I have a plane that is sort of the ground of this whole thing, and then I have a X particle system, and that is these little orange boxes on each side. And basically I just say, hey, I want you to drop, let's see how many particles at one time. So I want you to drop 50,000 particles at one time, and that's basically what's happening. So I'm going to drop this number down to 1,000 so you have an idea of what we're looking at. So now if I hit play, let's see if it actually functions a little better. So it just does one big shot, and you can tell it to do a continuous. You can tell it all sorts of stuff. My knowledge of X particles is very minimal. So they sort of fly in, and it has this box in here. So you just tell it, all right, here's my emitter, which is where it's shooting those particles out. Here is the domain I want it to live in, which is this yellow box here. And the modifiers that I want it to have is gravity. So, if I went in here and turned off the gravity, they would probably just float. So they just sort of float around like a bunch of little bugs. And it's not very cool. So I'd turn on gravity, and they would drop like a bunch of beads. So then I stuck this cylinder in here and just told it, hey, I want this cylinder, again adding those little tags to it, I want this cylinder to collide with the X particles. I don't want the X particles to go through it, so I just go to X particles and give it this collider tag. So so now it knows, all right, whenever these particles hit this thing, they're gonna form a circle around it, which is exactly what happened. You can kind of see it there as they're running into it, which is exactly what's happening here. And whenever you actually watch it in real time, this is the speed it flies in, super fast. And you can obviously slow that down and stuff, but that's how that is created there. Okay. It was a lot of fun to figure out abstract ways to tell these types of things. These types of little messages. This little section here was again, all Cinema 4D. So let's jump into Cinema 4D. Let's see, for Crash. Maybe this one. Yeah. And this is having, let's see, turn off some of these things here. So this would be taking a shape. Let's say I took one of these guys here and added a displacer to it. So it's basically just going to displace all of the, I think this is the way to do it, all of the polygons here. So I can say noise, animation speed, let's go 2, and strength, I want to be a lot. So this is a bad example, but it's sort of doing this whole thing here, and it's just taking that noise layer in this displacer, and it's doing a sort of animation in here, almost like fractal noise in After Effects, if you know what that is. And it's using that as it's taking the black and the white and making that be your animation. So that's obviously not that super cool, but if I added more segments, yeah, add more segments to it, it's taking every little polygon. Otherwise, it's just this here. So if I did, you can see all these little polygons here. It's taking those and just exploding them. So then I would take this idea here and pretty much duplicate that, and then put that into a what they call an atom array. And an atom array will just do the lines, I guess, of the edges of the polygon. So I'd throw this into an atom array, and then I get this little option here, and I can maybe bump that down pretty small. And then it's just a bunch of crazy lines. Probably would turn that down back to just a few things there. Okay. Threw that all together, and it came up with this madness here. And then I have this little particle generator in there, just the same little particle system that we used. Nothing fancy. There's just some particles floating around in that middle section there to give this look here. So pretty simple, effective animation. So it's just all kinds of wackiness. All right. exported that out as a, and what was great about this is I got to spend a lot of time in Cinema 4D, but when keeping it without all kinds of shadows and reflections and things, I could export these pretty quick from Cinema and put them in After Effects and do a lot of trial and error to get it just right, and not spend days rendering out 5 seconds of something. Okay, let's go back here. My comps are getting out of control. For getting purpose, I don't really spend a ton of time on this. This was probably my least favorite section here, but this was using Grayscale Gorilla's transform option, and that would just basically it's a super easy way to do some fun little animations, but you basically put it into this transform plugin and tell it what you want it to do. So let's see how fast it'll move. So there's a lot of options for what that looks like. So when it transform, I could say, so right now it's set to dust in the wind, but I could maybe tell it I want it. There's all these little presets. So I could say popcorn, and let's see what that does. So forgetting should be what changes. So it's just kind of popping up like a bunch of popcorn in a pot versus this like dissolve look here. Okay. So that's how I did that. Same thing with back here was just a plane with that displacer on it and an atom array to get the grid layout of just a basic square plane inside of Cinema 4D. Throwing that camera on there. So for this one, I just kept it at perspective at 36, nothing fancy. Jumping back here. Moving on through, getting close to the end. So this one was a lot of fun. This was using also Cinema 4D to get this shatter effect here, and I messed around with it the other day, and I really hope I didn't save over it. So let's find out, because I got a feeling I did. Let's see. Yeah, I thought I did. Okay, that's okay. Maybe delete this and see if it's still here. But this is using what they call, maybe that's it. My comps are all over the place. Where is it? Cameras are everywhere. Let me just delete this here. So there's some text. I'm gonna get to it in a minute. Well, basically, I took this is what I want right here. Don't want this. I took a text layer inside of Cinema 4D, and I want to say I made it pretty thin, but I turned it into, used what they call Voronoi fracture, and it just kind of breaks up your image or your layer. Let's see if this works. It just breaks it up in a bunch of pieces, which is kind of cool. And then I had a sphere, let's see if this is it here, just fall onto it and shatter to pieces at certain spots, and it turned out cooler than I thought it would. So let's see what happens when I do this. Let me turn this camera off. Oh boy, got a whole mess here. Delete that. I need to add collider. Sorry for the delay here. Let's see if this works. Okay, get in there. Take the sphere. Let's move this down here. See if this works. Boom. All right, so I had this sphere kind of bounce up into place. This was actually probably pretty thin. This was small. Had a lot of bounce on it, so you can basically tell it. You can tell Cinema to take this and make it dynamic, which means it'll be affected by gravity and the world around it, and I can give it a whole lot of bounce to it. So let's see what this does. Oh, I missed it. Move this way some. boom. So that's sort of the gist there. Doesn't look near as cool just because I've messed everything up already, but you get the idea. And maybe give these even more bounce or less friction. So as it falls, it just shatters it into pieces. And so I had it sort of come bouncing in from the left to the right and scattering itself across those letters, and it created that look right there, which is pretty cool. I thought it was a kind of nice little look. So I just have the ball turned off so you can't really see it, but there's a ball bouncing and shattering those into pieces. Yeah, like that. Super cool looking. It almost had like I don't know if you've seen Gravity, but when in Gravity all the things are exploding in space, it kind of had that look to it once it was all done. Anyways, I was a fan. Okay, moving on. So close to the end. Thank you for sticking around if you're still here with me. This was... I like the effect of this this reveal with that music, and the text would reveal, slide down. I think I just did those with some basic, let's see. Your office. I guess I did all of that inside of Cinema 4D as well. This is where I wanted the, let's see, office. Stepped out. Back up so we can see what's going on. So, what did I come up with?
And ignition.
It would fly out just using cloners and planes to have it move just to a basic cube and with a cloner, and so they kind of stretch out, and as they stretch out, the sun is somewhere back here, somewhere around here, Sterilite maybe, and it's casting the shadow. So as it stretches out, you're casting a shadow right on top of these letters, or right on top of the steps. So you can see the shadow there. Just gives you that really cool looking two-tone abstract shadow. So that was how that was made there. Then the camera flies back as this really janky looking door slams shut. So it's kind of funny looking. This one took a while to get right, and it's having that perspective look on it. Oops. Uh-oh. Not it messed up. There we go. This is again that perspective camera, or sorry, not perspective, but parallel camera, and it flies out, slams the door. So yeah, getting that to make sense and also be abstract was difficult, but that's how that was done with the cloner, that perspective camera, and really leaning into those lights to get that shadow just right. Yeah, there's that. Okay, I'll move on. Oh, thank you, Raymond. That's very kind of you to say. He says the amount of love you have for the craft is evident, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's super fun to come up with something that just fits just right. So many times there's a lot of during the process there's a lot of roadblocks, but this one felt like it worked pretty well. So thank you. So this was the again, nothing too fancy. The X particles coming together and colliding. I think I needed to add just a little bit more color to these to get those to show up, so you could actually see what was going on versus just straight black. It didn't quite work. So this is again was setting up let's see if it's in here. Setting up those X particle systems. Let's see, hashtagging. And having them drop tons of particles in at the same time. This is probably it here. So I'm going to try to hit play and see if it actually does it. So big shot, tons of particles. One side's white, one side's black, and they just come flying in. And so my camera, if I pause it, my camera is, I moved it, the camera's like down here, so that you could just see them come flying in. This is like dead center, and you can watch them collide. and splash. So when I render it out, that's what it looks like. There's so much more I want to learn with X particles that I'm just intimidated, and also the time that it takes to learn is a lot. So anyways, render that out inside of Cinema, and then made sure it was also a PNG sequence so that I could put the text in behind it. So all that text is done inside of After Effects. So if I go here and wanted to change that to, you know, work, then it's all behind those layers, because that's just a PNG sequence, which makes a big file, but you know, that's fine. So if let's see, so there you can see it's just transparent through all those things there, and then added just a touch of a little drop shadow so that you could get the sense that these letters were behind it, just a little bit. Okay, let's see, what do we have left? I won't go over this too much. This is just a you know, some text layers on there, as well as those scribble lines that we've already talked about. Then I used added just maybe a adjustment layer or something here, and then you can add a grid effect to it. That's under Effect and Generate, I believe. And you can tell it grid, and then you can change what size it is. So if I want this to be 100 by 100, you know, it changes that grid outline. Or I can maybe make that thicker. So just a little subtle thing there, and then have these squares sort of randomly flashing, and those are just basic shape layers placed on that grid. Then using that camera to have that move, sort of fly out. So that was that one, nothing too fancy there. This one was straight from and the Grayscale Gorilla did a thing a long time ago, and if you're getting this Cinema 4D, definitely mess with Grayscale Gorilla on you know, learning a lot of stuff. And so that was sort of a straight pull from one of their tutorials, which they've also you know, somebody designed it and then they redesigned it and had a tutorial on it. So let me see if I can find that one here. I don't remember what it was called. Remember, maybe? Yeah. And this was using let me turn this off. Let's see. Whoa. So this is using a sphere. Let's see. And then I think you have like you put a cloner on it, and then you tell it you have a step effector to it. And that step effector sort of shrinks it down like a little Russian, one of those little Russian dolls, basically. So you can change what the steps are and how big or how small it should get as it rotates in there. So you can go there, and then you just mess around with all of the, let's see, what is step? Is this one the one that's moving it? So then the rotation is just spinning it around however you want. It just makes a really cool effect, almost like an artichoke. So there's lots to do there. So I just played with some of the parameters in that rotation. So again, a sphere, turned that into a hemisphere, gave it a little bit of thickness, dropped it into a cloner, made a whole bunch of cloners, and then added that step effector to the cloner, and started messing around with those parameters inside of the step effector to get that look there. And this is the movement. And there I did the text inside of that just so it would wrap it just perfectly. So it's sort of making this little conch shell looking thing inside of Cinema. Cinema 4D is so fun. Okay, so we're almost to the end. Next thing I did, reconnect, was this here, just a basic text layer, but added a just some glitchiness here. I think they just downloaded some stock glitch stuff, stock glitch footage. Let's see if I have that here, random. Somewhere in here, noise. This is just a bunch of random noise. So that was maybe just some stock stuff that I downloaded forever ago, and threw that in there. And to make, let's see if it, not sure if it affects the text at all, but if you were going to do some cool glitchy effects, which a lot of people ask about, you would make it a layer. So we'll just call this glitch. And basically you take any layer. So I'm just gonna make a text layer. We'll just put here tutorial, make that white so you can see it. Hit OK. And then you have to add the layer that you want to create the glitch. So this noise, for instance, I have to actually add that to my composition. And then I can turn it off. I don't need it to actually be on, but I go to the tutorial and I add an effect and go to distort and displacement map, I do believe. And so it's just going to displace this text, but you have to tell it what do you want to use to displace that text with, and that is under displacement map layer, and I want that noise layer that I added to my composition. And so now it's going to start messing that stuff up. And so the more I mess with these numbers, the more of that glitchiness I get. So I would set some keyframes to those numbers. And the glitchy style is really going to depend on what your glitch texture is made of. So if I wanted to add some random glitchiness to it, this is probably how I would do it. Let's see. Yeah, so basically just putting in some values for a lot of displacement down to 0, and then it stays at 0, and then it goes back up and then back down. So if I render that out, you can sort of see. But I would probably also do a hold keyframe, so right click on those and do hold, so that it goes from, it doesn't ramp up from 60 to 0 or whatever, it would just automatically goes to it. So now you can kind of see you're getting some glitchy stuff to your texture. So that's kind of how that glitch effect is made. Yes, I will keep. I think I can take this live video and turn it into an actual video that'll stay on our YouTube channel. So yeah, I know I'm flying through it way too fast. Again, it's just more of a breakdown, but hopefully there's little snippets you can take from it. But I hope, yeah, it will let me save this for people to go back and look at, because I know that not everybody can do a live stream. The other little effect here, super subtle, but inside of here I have an adjustment layer. Much like Photoshop, you can add adjustment layers, and this is just a empty layer, but until you add some effects to it, it won't do anything. So I added a distort, I think it was distort maybe, and CC lens, could be perspective. Where is it? Stylize. One of these, there is a, yeah, CC lens here, and you can sort of add this almost like a fisheye vibe. So the more I pull it there, it does this sort of lensy effect. So in the final, you can see, oops. There we go. Let me set my pulls it into pretty much no lens effect. Just and that glitchiness going on in the background is just that main noise layer that I showed you, and then I put some mask around it to add just a little bit of so here it's that same noise layer, but with a random mask I just drew around it so that it looked kind of glitchy. Okay. Down to the wire, down to the final stretch here. So this little section was sort of random, but I love the way it turned out, was taking a lot of the elements that this project had in it already and building a little cross out of it. I wasn't really sure how I was going to end it, but basically took a lot of these little pieces. So for instance, even pieces from like the countdown, just had some cool textures in there. And then let me see, I'm gonna get back to, I got way too many things open. Would take that, drop it in here, and then just draw a mask around it. So you can see a lot of the elements that we've already gone through are inside of this cross. So right here's that weird sphere that looks like a conch shell. Those particles are running into each other right there. Let me lock that down so we can play around with it. So I just drew a little square mask around this. So if I hit M on the keyboard and remove that mask, you can see this is, that's not a good one. Let's do this one. M on the keyboard, delete that mask, and now you see I have that entire rediscover particles smashing and sloshing around together. But if I put that mask back on, it's just that little section that I've saved. So just built this cool little cross out of it and had them randomly appear one by one and build it up. And then it cut to the ending slide with Creative One Days. This little flicker effect is pretty simple to make. So if I go to Creative Church, I think this is it. Let's see. Hit U on the keyboard. So this is using, again, that one of these little animate things. So if you have a text layer and you click this animate, I used, I believe, just the opacity. So you can click on opacity there and then just start messing around with those values. So the start to end to offset, and it can shift the opacity of each letter around super fast. And so just that's really what's making that kind of that neon sign lettering effect going on. So you got your text layer, open that up, go to animate, opacity, turn the opacity down to 0, and then play with your pieces here. You can go to advanced and turn on random, I believe, randomize order, and then as you kind of fade them in, you can see it's doing that number right there. So as this number is being keyframed, I'm also moving the offset as well. So that's how you get that. Okay, then the last little thing was the flag, which again was another a nod to Grayscale Gorilla's fantastic stuff in their tutorials. Is I'm just taking this, going into Cinema 4D, open up a new thing here, and basically we'll make a plane, and I need to see, well, many kind of, and then you can, I guess you can make it like a cloth maybe. But if I hit play, it's just going to fall out of the sky, I think. Well, maybe not. Maybe I need to make it editable. Yeah. So basically what you would pin it to some sort of object or whatever. I think I can do that here. Let's see. Forces, dress. Gotta remember how to do this. Yeah, so I think I need to go to the points. And then I select my points. And then I think I go to here. Fix points maybe. Set. And then if I hit play, yeah, it kind of flaps around like that. So I did that, but then I turned on some wind. Crank that wind up to, let's see, 2. There it goes. Probably gravity should come down to like -2. So, or I could keep that at -9. Wind speed is 0, and it just kind of flops there. Or I could put wind, and then tell the wind direction to be maybe -y. You know, just make a little flag there. Add their texture to it, or their logo to it, and render that way. It does get a little you know, janky there, but you can drop that into a subdivided surface, and it smooths that out to where it looks like a flag, which is, it adds to your render a little bit, but that's basically how you get that flag look. Pretty cool. Okay, I think that about covers it. Now I'm thinking about it. Let me go back and see the flag. I had some of the Apollo 11 moon landing audio in there for the actual music mix. So this is all well and good and has a lot of cool stuff. But man, it really, I tell you what, you know, outside of this cool stuff, even if you just had the script on top of the music, I think it would still have a pretty cool impact because the music worked really well, and the timing when you change on the beat, that stuff matters so much than just doing a project and then throwing some random music on there. So being able to animate to that and build everything off that, just like a movie is, just like in real life is, they edit it and they score it to the beat and to the cuts and to the emotion. So that stuff just really matters. So putting a lot of work on the front end before just jumping in and making it look cool is what's most important, in my opinion. So I think that about does it. I know I flew through so much of that so incredibly fast. So I don't, there's probably tons of questions, and I skipped over a ton, and hopefully you were able to learn something, but I hope this was helpful. It was super fun to do and super fun project to make. I'm honored to do it. One last little thing that I'll cover real quickly is the last little bit of this look is the adding some grain and not making everything perfectly white and perfectly black, even though their brand probably was. I kind of took some liberties there and pulled some of that color out. So I have this tint, it's an adjustment layer with the tint effect on it. And so if I did make it just black and white, it would look like this, which is fine. But adding just a little bit of tint and making it not quite fully black and also not quite fully white, just adds a little bit more texture to it. And then I have another adjustment layer that is just a noise layer effect. And then you go to noise and do add noise, and just maybe 3 or 4%. You can see the more I crank it up, the more noise I get, but just a little bit in there adds some movement and some interest and some tangibility to it, in my opinion. So last little thing I did too is I had these little specks going on, these little white specks, and that was just actually a rendered out with Trapcode Particular, and just rendered out a little MP4 of that. So that is about it. I'm actually going to be, since we got to make this for Creative Church, they were super gracious enough to let us take this animation and turn it into a series of our own that we can put on Pixel Preacher. So if you're not really sure about Pixel Preacher, then check us out at pixelpreacher.net. But I'll show you really quickly a little preview of what that series is going to be. Let me see here. So this is the first preview of that. So there's a lot of other cool elements I wish I could incorporate, but I got to keep them kind of short. But here's a quick look at what the what we're calling a redo. So sort of a start, a new year. Got some volume here. Still using that same music. Was able to reword it and make it to what the series is about. And trying again and learning from our past. Hopefully this week. Where you can change the color tone. So little new series that will be coming out there based on this project that we did with Creative Church. So thanks again. If you're not a part of our Facebook group, please do join our Facebook group. Let me throw that in here really quick. Facebookgroups.com or Facebook.com/groups/sermon series design, and you can jump in and join the conversation there, or visit us at pixelpreacher.net and check out the series that we have available, all editable and customizable for you. So thanks again. Thank you for sitting in for the time it took. I know it was long, and we hope to do some more of these, and we will see you in the future. Be sure to also subscribe to this YouTube channel, as that helps us out. So take care. We'll see you again soon.